Hey, I'm Josh, and this is the weekly update for Redeeming Grace Church. It is December 1st of 2020. I normally send these out on Monday, but yesterday kind of got away from me, and so today's Tuesday, and I'm releasing this video to you. Normally, I would tell you about some events and things that are coming up in the life of our church and ways that you can get connected. But you're smart. You can go to rgcrc.org and click on events and figure that out yourself. It's easy to find. But what I want to do today is keep my promise to you that I gave during the sermon this past Sunday from John 19, of unpacking this very interesting statement that Jesus makes from the cross in verses 25 through 27 of chapter 19. Jesus is on the cross, he's being crucified, and John, the writer of this gospel, is standing there, and there's this exchange that Jesus has between him and Jesus' mother Mary and John. And so this is what it says, and I just think this is fascinating and maybe has pretty important implications for us in terms of how we view family life versus church family life and what that looks like. So here's what it says. It says, "But standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. Then Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved," which John is, that's how he refers to himself, "standing nearby. He said to his mother, 'Woman, behold your son.' Then he said to the disciple, 'Behold your mother.' And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home." So it's fascinating, one, that Jesus, in the middle of doing this big cosmic pay for the sins of humanity event, is also thinking about individuals, including his own mom. He has such control and love and affection that he cares even about individuals, even as he is bearing the wrath of God against human sin. That's amazing, and really, really comforting to know that that Jesus himself cares for individuals, even while he's making the universe go and resolving the biggest of human problems. But the other thing that's interesting to me is that in Mark chapter 6 and Matthew 13, we read that Jesus has 4 biological brothers and at least 2 biological sisters. And yet, when it comes to the fact that he needs to transfer the care of his mother to someone, he does not hand her over to biological family to be cared for, but to spiritual family, to John. Which should tell us something here, that for Jesus, it seems to me, that spiritual family by faith is of greater importance, superiority, responsibility than even biological family. Now, that might hit us kind of strange because as Christians, we are big on family values and the defense of marriage and good fathering and mothering of our own children, like the responsibilities that come with that, all for that. But we do have Jesus here bypassing biological family in order to make sure that his mom is cared for by spiritual family. And I just got to thinking about that. Is there other places in the scripture where Jesus seems to give preference and priority to spiritual family over biological family? And what do you know? We do see that. In Matthew chapter 4, verse 21, Jesus is gathering his disciples, and it says, going on from there, he saw 2 brothers, James the son of Zebedee and John his brother, in the boat with Zebedee their father, mending their nets. And he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. So part of the call of Jesus was that they needed to leave the family business, leave whatever hopes and dreams their father had for them, and to leave that and come follow Jesus. When it came to choosing between their father and Jesus, they had to choose to follow Jesus. Matthew chapter 8, when Jesus entered Peter's house, this is verse 14, he saw his mother-in-law lying sick with a fever. He touched her hand and the fever left her, and she rose and began to serve him. So Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law. Well, wait a minute. That must mean that Peter's married. If he's got a mother-in-law, then that means he has a wife. This is his wife's mother, which means that when Jesus calls Peter to follow him, it comes, at least in some regards, at the expense of Peter's marriage. Now, I'm not saying that he left his wife or there was a divorce or, a lot of Jesus's ministry is happening around around Peter's house. So I'm not saying that in that sense that Peter abandoned his wife, but there was this following Jesus did take priority over Peter spending time with his wife. It did come at that price. At least it appears to me. I don't know that for sure, but that seems to be a little bit of the implication here, is that Peter had a wife that at least was seeing Peter a lot less because he was following Jesus for these 3 years. Matthew chapter 12. While Jesus was speaking to the people, behold, his brothers and his mother stood outside asking to speak to him. Verse 48, and he replied to the man who told him, who is my mother and who are my brothers? And stretching out his hand towards his disciples, he said, here are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. So he's saying people who are spiritual brothers and sisters have priority access to me over my biological mother and brothers. And so for Jesus, at least, he's saying very here, and I think very deliberately saying, that there is an intimacy that comes with spiritual family that is superior even than the intimacy and access of biological family. Very interesting. Matthew chapter 19, Jesus says this, everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or children or lands for my name's sake will receive 100-fold and will inherit eternal life. So it seems to him like it's going to be normal that people actually leave and see the breakdown of biological families for the sake of following Jesus and entering into the spiritual family. And I think that's the promise here. Those who have had to leave their biological family and seen those relationships go sour or go south will receive 100-fold, meaning that they're going to be brought into a spiritual family and have spiritual brothers and sisters, which is to say that the trade, losing relationship with your biological brothers, sisters, father, mother, whatever, children, the gain of spiritual brothers and sisters, spiritual fathers and mothers is superior. It's superior. It's a better trade. In Luke, I think is it chapter 10 or chapter 20? I forget exactly where it is, but the religious leaders try to trap Jesus in some questions about the resurrection, get them caught in a bait. And so they create this scenario where they're like a woman marries this man, and he dies, and so she marries his brother, and he dies, and she marries the next brother, and 7 times, and then she dies. And they, in order to trap Jesus, say, in heaven, in the age to come, which one will she be married to in the next life? And this is meant to be a gotcha question. See, obviously, there's not a resurrection or a new, because that would be absurd. That could never happen. And Jesus goes, no. There's an age to come, but you misunderstand that there will be no marriage or giving in marriage in the age to come, which is always a bit kind of shocking to us. I just think about this. I think that communicates to us that the fundamental eternal relationship that people have between one another is fundamentally brother and sister spiritually. So let me just play this out a little bit. My wife and I, we've been married for 15 years. We love being married and wife. We love that identity. We love that relationship with each other. But that's actually not the fundamental eternal reality of, that's not the realest, truest relationship between us. We are fundamentally and will eternally be fundamentally not husband and wife, but brother and sister in Christ. And so marriage at some point is going to dissolve. That husband-wife is going to be a temporary reality. The fundamental, realer, truer, eternal relationship is our brotherhood and sisterhood in Christ. That's why I think the Bible tells us that we should only, those of us that are believers should only marry other believers, is because the marriage works best when it's built on the foundation of the fact that you're already spiritual family, and therefore that is the truer, realer reality. And think about this with my kids. I love being their dad. I love that they're my children, but that ultimately I am longing for the day when the realest, truest relationship between me and my sons is not father-son, but brothers. I want the realest, truest relationship ultimately to be that we are both children of God. We are both trusting in Jesus Christ. And the reality that we are spiritual family is more important and supersedes the fact that we're biological family. And the same with my daughters, is that fundamentally, I want the baseline of our relationship, not that I'm their dad and they're my daughter. That will always be the case in some sense. But the more fundamental, realer, truer relationship is that I go from being dad to being brother, and they go from being daughters to being sisters. And so I think that's clear in the scriptures. In fact, Paul says this in 1 Corinthians 7, talking about marriage and singleness and what should be preferred and what should we do. And here's what he says. He says that he wishes everyone would be like he is, which is single, so that the person can give themselves to the spiritual family, to the kingdom family, not into the temporary biological family stuff, but into the eternal spiritual family, because the spiritual family is realer, truer, more eternal than the biological family. He's not putting that down, but he does say this. This is what I mean, brothers. The appointed time has grown very short. From now on, let those who have wives live as if they had none. And let those who mourn as those who were not mourning, and those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing, and those who buy goods as though they had no goods, and those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with it, for the present form of this world is passing away. So, what he's saying there is not that we should neglect biological family. That means a lot. We've got lots of scriptures that point to that. But that we ought to make sure that we are putting our best efforts into spiritual families, those things that will last forever. So, as a youth pastor for 20 some years, not 20 some, about 20, I guess. It was 2000 when I started to really get involved in youth ministry, even while still a teenager myself. I've done a lot of study. I've had a front row seat of hundreds of families. I've had a front row seat of hundreds of families, Christian families, non-Christian families, in their approach of how they balance the biological family responsibilities with the spiritual family priorities, basically church, family activities versus church. What should take priority? What should take precedence? And here's what the stats say. I've done a lot of academic work in this. I've got a lot of firsthand experience. I know the Bible pretty well. And so when you put those things together, here's what the stats say. They say over the last couple generations, 70 to 90% of those kids who grow up in Christian homes walk away from the faith. 70 to 90% of church kids walk away from church upon graduating high school. So that tells us that there is something that we are not passing on to our kids. And I think that this idea of spiritual family playing a higher priority, even at times over biological family concerns, is part of the equation here. This is what the research shows, is that those who have kept their faith, those church kids that have kept their faith on into adulthood, become lifelong disciples, there's a few things that have made the difference. One is that the gospel has always been presented clearly and compellingly. This doesn't mean that there's fancy pizza parties and some super awesome youth ministry or whatever, but they have a community, that there is a church community that is very clear on the gospel. And so we as Redeeming Grace Church are trying very hard to be very clear on the gospel. Not trying to be fancy or flashy, but clear on the gospel every Sunday. And we also want to be very clear on the implications of the gospel, which is why we have meaningful membership. We ask for there to be a clear, articulated commitment. And that's why in our family meetings, we articulate the gospel every time. In every service, hopefully in every small group, there's this articulation of the gospel. And the reason that we want our kids to hear us make a covenant commitment with one another is we want to show them that what Christ has done demands our all. It demands a total allegiance, and it's clear. We've spelled out very clearly in our covenant and our statement of faith, and we are regularly reaffirming that, yes, this gospel is true, and we are committed to it. All right? So that's number one. That's one of the big difference makers between seeing our kids walk in faith for a lifetime or walk away from it later, is have they been given a clear, compelling gospel message? Number two is that parents have been living out a real commitment to the gospel in their homes. So this means that parents are not planning camping trips. They're not allowing sports activities. They're not regularly coming up with excuses or things that pull them away from the spiritual family. Okay, they're seeing their parents read their Bible. They're seeing their parents pray at home. They're seeing dad sing at church. Sing passionately at church. You have no idea what an impact that makes on a kid. To see dad enthusiastically singing songs to Jesus is a massive impact on kids. So the idea that parents are making a real commitment, that's why we have a covenant and why we include our kids at the family meetings in our reciting of the covenant, is they want to go, oh, this gospel is serious, it's real, it really does give life, and my parents are committed to it, and I hear them verbally with other adults committing themselves to following Jesus in a tangible, specific, clear way. Like, this is all strategically designed to show your kids that this is truer and realer and better than anything else that the world has to offer. So what that means is that parents have to make a relentless commitment to go there in Bible study, there in discipleship. They make worship and service on Sunday a top priority that they don't bail on anything for. This is why I lead a small group. It's not so much because I'm a pastor. although that's part of it. It's not so much that I even want to bless those people that come to my small group. That's part of it. One of the top priorities for me is that I want to teach my kids that all of this entire house and all of their toys and their room and everything is not ours. And that we want our toys to get broken. We're okay with that. We're okay with stuff being spilled on the floor. We're okay with the fact that maybe we're a little worn out tonight. It'd be easier to not have people over, but it's going to know our spiritual family is a priority, and we will always choose our spiritual family over anything else, over a quiet movie night at home, over a camping trip, over basketball practice. We will always, always, always have a place and a relentless commitment to make sure that our church family is in our home and we get to invest our time, our money, our resources, our stuff gets broken, our house gets beat up, our spiritual family is of high priority. These people are made in the image of God. They're our spiritual brothers and sisters, and there is a place for them here, and we will make it happen, and we will not cancel that except for only the most extreme circumstances. That's because I want my kids to understand what the gospel is really about, what following Jesus is really about. That's why we do that. And then the third thing that makes a big difference in seeing kids, whether or not they stick with the faith once they graduate or they don't, is that they have, the research shows that it seems like the magic number is that they have they can point to in their growing up years, 7 relationships with a Christian adult, 7 meaningful relationships with a Christian adult. And so that's why spiritual family is so important, is because you need that pastor and that deacon and that Sunday school teacher and just that person that hangs out and greets you at the door. That seems to be one of the common denominators. When they ask students who did not walk away from their faith, they point to there being 7 influential Christian adults who made an investment in them, 7 meaningful relationships. I don't know if you've noticed this, but in our small groups, guess what? There's at least 7 adults in every single small group. You know why that is, right? It's because we know that we want our kids to be able to see and interact in informal and informal settings and build relationships with each of those adults. Now, it might be at varying levels, but this is part of why we have uniquely designed this church according to the scriptures, according to what I've understood and seen of family dynamics, and just what we've seen from the physical academic research makes kids most likely to want to commit to Jesus and follow him. Obviously, only God can do this work in the heart, but he does use means, and he uses us to set the example and show the way. So a clear and compelling understanding of the gospel, parents who really do live a committed Christian life from the home, make real sacrifices to be part of the spiritual family, actually bend the biological family priorities to embed them in the life of the spiritual family. You serve your biological family best when you embed them in the spiritual family. And sometimes when those two things are at odds with each other, the biological family should at times yield to the spiritual family. You're actually serving your family much better in that way. And then the third thing is that they have a relationship with 7 meaningful adults. So if you are a younger parent or an aspiring parent, I would ask you to consider a few things, especially in light of this video. Look at those who are empty nesters and maybe at some point ask them, what are the things when it came to the spiritual upbringing of their kids are they most proud of, and what are their deepest regrets? And I bet it's related to one of these 3 things I mentioned to you. Were they in it? They were the things that they were glad they did or wished they did, is that they had been in a church that was very, 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 very clear and specific on the gospel message and presented it compellingly. Number 2, that they should have or are glad that they lived a sacrificial, all-in Christian life themselves and took their kids with them. And then third, they were very strategic to make sure that their kids developed real, significant relationships with Christian adults within the church, at least 7. My guess is that most of those empty nest parents are either glad they did that or wish they had done that. And I also would encourage you to consider making observations of how those who have kids that are in stages ahead of you, those with elementary, middle school, high school students, watch how they parent, watch their commitment level, and watch the impact on their kids. Watch those who have dads that sing and read their Bibles and are enthusiastically engaged in the life of the church, and I bet you'll see the kids follow suit. Those that you see that are a little bit more disengaged or not that interested, or those that are missing church more often or not as committed to a small group, watch the effect on the kids. Just watch it play out, and you'll learn a lot. And those of you that don't have kids, remember that the spiritual family is the better family anyway. So invest in our kids. Be one of those 7 adults. Make a real commitment there. And so I don't mean for this to come on heavy-handed at all. I just want to, as a youth pastor, I saw an opportunity here to speak to an issue that I think we as a church and Christian families really need to think about. And I just don't think we are as strategic in this as we sometimes think. So I'm afraid that sometimes in the name of family activities, we inadvertently downplay the priority of spiritual family that I think Jesus wants us to have, and in a sense, sort of vaccinate our kids against real Christianity. If it doesn't cost us anything, if it doesn't come at the expense of the family, at least sometimes, then our kids really don't have any interest in it. They don't see it as valuable, and we, in a sense, sort of inoculate them to the real thing. So we're committed at this church to be all in, to present a really clear gospel message. We are going to ask people relentlessly to be committed, to be committed to Jesus Christ, be baptized, become a member, make a covenant commitment, join a small group, be committed for the sake of your kids, for the sake of other people's kids. It's going to take time and investment, and it's going to mean that you're going to say no to some other things, but it's going to look truer and realer and more compelling to your kids, and they're going to get a picture of the real thing. And then lastly, that's 7 meaningful adults. I'm telling you, that 7 meaningful adults makes a big difference. So make sure that you are finding a place where your kids can rub shoulders with godly Christian older people, because that's going to make a big difference in whether or not they find Christianity attractive and real and powerful, and whether they don't. So there you go. Thanks for letting me just share kind of my youth pastor heart and experience with you. I find it fascinating that Jesus himself entrusts his own mother to spiritual family over biological family. And actually, many of his brothers do later come to faith in Jesus and actually write some of the books of the Bible, which is pretty fascinating. So maybe even in that shocking, maybe somewhat offensive thought of Jesus choosing his disciple to care for mom instead of them, maybe there was something in that awakened them to trust in Jesus. I don't know that for sure. The Bible doesn't say, but maybe there's something about the priority that Jesus makes there that actually awakened them and drew them into to faith in Jesus and brought them into the spiritual family. So God bless you. Let me know if you have any questions about this. I'm sure this probably in some ways feels a little strange for some of you, but pray about this, think about this, talk about this as a family. And I think it'll make sense, and I think that you'll find your way through this. So God bless you, and I'll talk to you soon.